A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to NGPA's Up in the Air webinar series. My name is Brian Gambino, president of the NGPA. So happy to have you back with us at another action-packed virtual event. For those of you who have been joining us for the past couple of months, the NGPA has really stepped out of what we were so used to, which was in-person activities. Of course, due to the COVID pandemic, we were forced to rethink how the organization would operate. And we really took this big step into the digital world to bring a lot of aviation content right to your screens. We kicked this off back in January as we sat down with many of the sponsors of our organization here at NGPA, many corporate companies, many business aviation outfits, a lot of aviation product companies as well, to kind of take you on a path of bringing the information you needed during the pandemic to keep you up to date on the industry, to get you in tip-top shape to apply for jobs when the industry really took off again, which luckily we're seeing right now, as well as just to keep you informed and keep you connected. And today we're really happy to continue that with really taking a step back to the roots of how all of us begin our journeys throughout aviation, and that's in the world of general aviation. Admittedly, it's an area which I have been away from for quite some time. I have been working in the airline world for many years, and I kind of have said to myself, I really need to take a bigger step into general aviation. And I'm happy that I'm going to be learning along with a lot of you today about the best way to operate in general aviation as being pilot in command. Before we get into the presentation today, I just want to tell you a little bit about NGPA for those of you who might not know that much about us, for those of you who might be coming and joining us here at our Up in the Air webinar for the very first time. The NGPA is the largest LGBTQ aviation nonprofit. We are the worldwide LGBTQ aviation community. Over 3,000 members strong right now. The NGPA builds, supports, and unites the LGBTQ aviation worldwide. Through our social programs, through our advocacy efforts, through our scholarship program, we build that affirming social network to give a family to those who might be turned away from their own because of their gender identity, because of their gender expression, because of their sexual identity. And we are a place where LGBTQ aviators and allies can come to for that community, for that buildup, for that sense of belonging. And we're so happy to have grown our membership exponentially over the past couple of years. The organization kicked off 31 years ago in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And 31 years later, we're happy to be continuing on our upward trajectory and growing our presence and growing our reach and growing our impact worldwide. So thank you so much for joining us here at our Up in the Air webinar series. For those of you who continue to support NGPA, not only with your attendance, but also your membership and also your donations. If you're not a member of NGPA, we highly encourage you to check out more about our organization. You can do that by going to our website, www.ngpa.org. Up in the top right-hand corner, you can click the Join Now button. We have memberships that start for individuals at $49. We have family memberships that include everyone in your household for $79. And if you're a student, only $20 for a yearly membership here at the organization. It brings with it a whole slew of benefits, which you can check out under the member resources section of our website, as well as connecting you to our global LGBTQ aviation community. Today is a very important day for NGPA as well, as it is the last day to get your applications in for the NGPA Scholarship Program. Our scholarship program has grown incredibly since it kicked off back in 1999, where we gave away $4,000 worth of scholarships in our very first year of operation with the NGPA Education Fund. Today, we are so happy that we are able to give away $156,000 in this calendar year alone to aspiring aviators. And we have scholarships that range from just getting started with your private pilot's license, going through to commercial, instrument, multi-engine rating. And we broadened our scholarship reach as well. We have full rides to A&P mechanic schooling. We have higher education scholarships to assist those that might be going into a different area or want to learn something new to add to their resume, if you will, for aviation with a different path. Check it all out at ngpa.org/scholarships. Again, those applications, they are due tonight, no later than 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. So again, $156,000 at stake. Go check it all out at www.ngpa.org. So what are we doing today? We're sitting down with an awesome gentleman who has put up his time to help out NGPA and really take us back to our GA roots. And so we're so happy to have Brian Schiff with us today, presenting on being pilot in command. Brian Schiff earned his Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Science from, in fact, my alma mater. I guess it was really his alma mater. He did go before me. No offense, Brian, at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And he also earned his Master's of Science in Aviation Safety from the University of Central Missouri. He's been actively flight instructing since 1985 and has even spent time as an FAA designated examiner. While he's also a captain on the Airbus at American Airlines, Brian's roots and passion is deeply planted within general aviation. He owns his own Citabria, and he's flown a wide variety of aircraft all throughout the general aviation spectrum. He sits on the board of directors for NAFI, that's the National Association of Flight Instructors. He's an authority and regular presenter at seminars on aviation. We're so happy to have him with us today. And in fact, I see his father, Barry Schiff, who was presented for NGPA in the past as one of our attendees. So hi, Barry, thanks so much for being here with us. But it's my pleasure to hand it over to Brian Schiff for his presentation on being pilot in command. Brian, thank you so much for being with us today. As they say, you have control.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank you for inviting me to come speak to you guys and and participate in what I think is a wonderful program, especially in light of the COVID that's going on and a lot of people becoming uncurrent and not be able to go out and go flying. I think we're getting back into that. It seems there's no slowdown at the airports when I'm there. That's for sure. But I really do appreciate you having me, and I'll hope to represent here. You make me sound like a good guy.
You know what? From everything that I've ascertained from talking to you the past couple months, I will corroborate that story. You are a good guy.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you working with the scheduling snafus. And sometimes, you know, in the industry we're working, Mother Nature wins.
No, it's very true. And for those of you, I'm taking control back for a second because I forgot to mention something. For everyone here attending with us, we do have a question and answer box. As Brian goes through the presentation today, feel free to use the Q&A box down at the bottom portion of your screen, or you can use the chat function and send us a message. We will get to your questions towards the end of Brian's presentation. And if you actually want to ask a live question, you'll have the opportunity to do that towards the end. You'll see the raise hand function down there as well. We'll be able to unmute your microphone towards the end and you can ask a question live in real time here to Brian. So again, use your Q&A, use the chat, use the raise hand function. And Brian, I'll officially give it back to you. Thanks again for being here with us.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. I will start the PowerPoint here, and what I'll be talking about today is about being pilot in command, like what I would know about that. I have a few hours of being a pilot in command, but I want to start out with telling you a little bit of a story of when I once was asked, or someone I know was asked, what makes a great pilot? Well, a great pilot is basically someone who doesn't know he's a great pilot, and someone who continues educating himself or herself. And this is a great quote that I think from you know, someone I know very well myself, that I wish I knew half as much now as I thought I knew when I first became a pilot. And what that means is I thought I knew everything there was to know when I became a private. I got my commercial. I thought I knew everything because I just got my commercial pilot. Now I'm an ATP. But what I realized just how much there is to know and how little I actually did know. But I'm kind of preaching to the choir because you're here watching this and educating yourself and making yourself better as a pilot by watching presentations and listening to people like me and learning as much as you can. I'm going to start out with a little bit of a short video on the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which kind of explains this phenomenon about how much you know and how much you think you know. Let me make sure I got sound shared, and I'll go ahead and play this.
In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed a bank in Pittsburgh. He was caught because his only disguise was lemon juice. He covered his face with it. He knew that lemon juice could be used as an invisible ink when writing on paper revealed by heating. And he knew so little about why that worked, and he knew so little about how cameras worked, that he assumed with extreme confidence that lemon juice could make him invisible too. Seriously, Wheeler is an extreme example and was the inspiration for the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Novices, people unskilled in particular disciplines, will often overestimate their knowledge and abilities in said disciplines because they don't even know how little they know, how much more there is to learn. On the flip side, experts in particular fields will often underestimate their knowledge, have less confidence in their abilities, or think that everyone else has the same level of knowledge that they do. What drives the Dunning-Kruger effect is the fact that often, the more you learn about something, the more you realize just how rich and complex and overwhelming and full of as of yet unanswered questions it really is.
And so I found that to be a fascinating phenomenon, that I thought I knew everything, and then the more I learn, the more I realize there is to learn. And so a good pilot in command, first of all, starts educating himself and learning as much as he can about being pilot in command, about flying the airplane, about his systems, about the operation and the environment in which he's operating. So no good explanation of being pilot in command wouldn't start with the lift equation. So let's go over that and talk about some physics. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to talk about this. This isn't about learning complex theories or physics or math or anything like that. This is more of the soft stuff on the aeronautical decision making, the things that go into actually what's causing most of the accidents these days. And we are all taught about the airplane, about how a wing produces lift, aerodynamics, maneuvers, navigation, written exams, all this stuff that we're taught, but we're not taught how to be a great pilot in command. And we might be through watching our flight instructors and the people we fly with and learning from them. And I've had the benefit of, at the airline when I fly with as a co-pilot, now I used to fly with all kinds of different captains, I would take the best of the ones I liked and get rid of the things I didn't like, but I got to learn a lot about how to really be in command of a flight. And going and flying with different instructors, I learned different techniques of how to operate the airplane and how to actually be in command of the flight. And when I give flight reviews, I do see a lot of pilots not being so pilot in commandly. And the years that we spend as apprenticeship at an airline in the right seat, you get to learn a lot about that. But GA pilots, you get your license and then you're the pilot in command, and you just don't get to fly with many pilot in commands after that. So flying with other pilots or going up with different instructors, for starters, is one way to really learn about that. When I first interviewed with the airlines at TWA back in the late 80s, in 1989, I was in the room, small room, getting my interview, and they had this poster on the wall that said this: the most important wings on a plane are on the pilot. And I thought, that's a great quote. That's really good. What they asked me in the interview was, they pointed to the poster and they said, what does this mean to you? And, it means to me that a flight is no safer than its pilot. The pilot is the one who makes the flight safe. It's up to the pilot to do that. I mean, there are some rare occasions when something mechanical happens to the airplane, but most of the time a good pre-flight will prevent that. But this applies just as much to the captain of a 172 carrying one passenger as it does to a Boeing 747 carrying hundreds of passengers. And most passengers place an inordinate amount of trust in their pilot, and it's incumbent upon us to really come through when they trust us like that. Now, we know what the regs say, and I'm not going to get into too much detail on that, but the responsibility and authority of a pilot in command, and that the pilot in command is directly responsible for and the final authority to. And I'd just like to encourage all of you pilots to take that seriously, to really regard this with the gravity it deserves, because the pilot is the single greatest threat, and any pilot worthy of a certificate will have a little bit of a yellow stripe down his back and will exercise this authority when need be. You have, as pilot in command, the authority to deviate from any rule in an in-flight emergency. When you need to do what you've got to do, you do it. The pilot in command should take that authority to do that. And the AIM, and as well as the FARs, talks about how the pilot in command has the final authority and has been designated before and during the flight. Well, regarding that, being designated before and during the flight and being qualified and all that, this is kind of a biggie. If your two pilots go up together and both of you are qualified to be pilot in command, who's the pilot in command? Is it the guy in the left seat, the gal in the right seat, the instructor, the student? What if it's a commercial pilot going up with a private pilot? But I encourage you to determine before the flight who's going to be pilot in command and have a good briefing about who is going to be responsible and so on and so forth. If an accident occurs, of course, you can't answer the question later and say, well, it was his fault, or no, it was his fault. or her fault, it should be designated ahead of time and establish that before time brief who's going to do what the responsibilities are when two pilots fly together. If there's a runway incursion, whose fault is it? If I, as a 20,000-hour pilot, fly with a brand new private pilot just to go on a ride with him in his airplane, and we have a runway incursion, I would think that the FAA might start looking at me. And if there's any metal bent, the insurance company might look at the guy with 20,000 hours, even though the private pilot has been deemed the pilot in command before the flight. So just something to consider. Be thinking about who's going to be the pilot in command, and if you have more experience than who's going to be pilot in command, then you're always on your game. I'll tell you a story about one time when I really upset a passenger, and it was one of my first flying jobs. And this was about a story about saving jobs. And this was a fork in the road and a decision that I had to make as a pilot in command that was not viewed very happily by my passenger, so to speak. And the story goes, this was a flight from Carmel Valley to San Jose, California. And I was supposed to fly down to Carmel Valley, pick up a couple passengers and fly them back up, flying the boss. And Carmel Valley has a short runway with obstacles, and it's in a canyon. This particular day was very hot, no wind. And on this day, the passengers showed up with these big boxes, big heavy boxes. And they wanted to get as many of those into this Piper Aero non-turbocharged as they could, and the two of them and me. So three of us in this Piper Aero in this scenario, and I just did not feel comfortable with doing this without checking the books. So I said, hang on a second, I want to get out the performance manual. I want to look at runway required, density, altitude, and I'm a young 21-year-old, and here was the very important boss. And I want you to know a little bit about the boss who was looking over my shoulder while I wanted to look up this performance. And as he was getting very upset, my boss was somebody you may be familiar with. And at this time, this was my passenger, Steve Jobs, if you don't recognize him. And here's a little video just so you know what he's like.
Everything is a pressing issue. If we want to make the vision for Lisa a reality, we got to put in the hours and make something great.
Yeah, but we have a hard date on this software, and I'm sorry, but adding pretty fonts is not going to change that. I mean, Bill?
If you don't share our enthusiasm and care for the vision of this company...
No. I'm not understanding.
Get out.
What?
Get your shit and get out.
What
You're done.
What are you gonna fire me?
No! I already fired you! Why are you still here?
Steve, he was our best programmer in the division.
He's the best programmer that doesn't care about our vision.
So I show you that just to give you an idea of what my pastor was like. And Ashton Kutcher played Steve Jobs to a T in that movie. That was exactly what he was like. I had a lot of pressure put on me to make this flight. In fact, he said, well, we just did this last week and it worked out fine. Why are you doing this? And he's getting upset. And the other passenger was his boss, a guy by the name of Mike Markula, who gave Wozniak and Jobs the money that they needed to get their little garage computer idea going. And so these are my two passengers. At the time, I didn't really appreciate the high profile of who they were, and maybe back then they weren't. But I was looking up in the books I didn't like, and I said, here's my alternate plan. Why don't we fly over to Monterey, which you can see on the map here. It's a short distance. I'll fly over there empty, pick you guys up. You can load it up. We've got a longer runway. We got a headwind. It's cooler, no obstacles. I can take off out over the ocean. Everything should be a lot easier. He didn't like it, but he knew that I had put my foot down. This is the way we're going to do it. And I just realized, okay, this is maybe my last flight for this company, but at least I'm going to walk away from it. And they were very upset. Steve Jobs was yelling at me. Mike Markula was stopping him and saying, look, this is just going to take too long. They drove. Long story short, they drove. I flew to Carmel Valley. It took me 5 minutes. Took them 20 minutes to drive there. We loaded up the airplane, got all their stuff in it, took off. Now I might have taken up a little bit more runway than I needed to, and I might have kept the ground roll a little bit longer, and I might have climbed out a little shallower just to make a point, so that they could imagine what this might have looked like had we departed Carmel Valley, and think to themselves, maybe we'd made the right choice. But this was a very quiet, stressful flight. We get to San Jose, we unload the bags, and the line service guy comes to me and he says, yeah, Mike wants to see you in his office. So here it comes. Okay, I'm done with this job. I've ticked him off. I've said no. I've inconvenienced them, did what I had to do, and I don't care, and I'm done. I've got all the arguments going through my head as I make my way to his office. And I walk in and I sit down, and Mr. Markula says, Brian, have a seat, shut the door, blah, blah, blah. He's on a phone call, just like what you'd see in a movie, you know, a scene where you're getting ready to get yelled at. And I had every argument in my head going. I was ready for everything. And he really blew me away with his next question when he asked me, Brian, what are we paying you? And I told him. And he came back and he said, all right, anybody who will stand up to Steve Jobs the way that you did is somebody who we want. And he doubled my pay. He's, I'm going to double your pay, and we appreciate what you did and that decision, and that's who we want, someone who can do that and stand up to him in the interest of safety. And I said, well, I was floored. And that was a point in my career where, had I been fired, maybe the next decision I made would have been the wrong one. So having been rewarded for doing the right thing affected my decision making, the way I look at things down the road, and probably the way I act as a pilot in command and make decisions now, because at that fork in the road I did the right thing and was rewarded for it. So we've really got to avoid the whole get there-itis. We can really succumb to that. Pilots do that a lot, and if you look at a lot of the accidents that we've had, there are pilots who needed to get there for some reason. And if you need to get there for some reason, back it up and try and leave earlier and leave yourself an out. But I briefed this to all pilots I fly with, and even my co-pilots, that if we are going to fly this airplane, I want you to adhere to 3 rules. And in this order: 1, I don't care what you do as long as it's safe, as long as it's legal, and as long as it's comfortable for the passengers. And in that order. If you have to get rid of something at the bottom of the list and work your way up, but keep safety there and keep it paramount. And it's very important to resist the urge to get somewhere. As GA pilots, we're usually flying somewhere because we need to get there. As airline pilots, I'm just flying somebody around from A to B, and if they need to get there in the back, it doesn't affect my decision making. But as a GA pilot, we have a vested interest in getting where we're going to go, and we give ourselves our own pressure. And learning to resist these external pressures is vital to flying safely. You've got to take your need to get there out of the decision making process. And I'm showing this picture because this is an accident that I think we're all familiar with, that was probably because somebody succumbed to the pressures of having to get there. One way you can do that is to stay inside the envelope. The envelope that I teach is bound by many documents, including the AIM, the FARs, your insurance, advisory circulars, all the advice you're given. If you don't break any rules and you adhere to all the advice you're given, you're probably 90% there for not getting into an accident, and really eliminating the chances, because most of the accidents are happening from pilots who break the rules and get outside the limits of these rules, or get out from the green into the red, and breaking rules just a little bit. And you don't have to stay exactly to the rules if you're not current. Like, we're coming out of COVID now, and yes, 3 miles visibility is VFR, but why not give yourself a little bit of a margin and say, okay, until I get more current, refamiliarize, I'm going to make 5 miles my minimum, or I want a ceiling of at least 3,000 feet instead of 1,000 feet. The FARs, the AIMs, all the minimums and the limits that we're given, you're fully capable and allowed to make those limits a little bit tighter for yourself until you feel comfortable in any situation. So do that. You're 90% of the way there. A good pilot in command, again, you know the FARs, you know the AIM, you know your airplane. You educate yourself. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are here. You're educating yourself, trying to learn as much as you can. And a good pilot will memorize some of the things that you just don't have time to look up in your airplane, some of the emergency procedures. I encourage you to review the emergency procedures section of your airplane and look over the big stuff like fires or things that are really going to be time sensitive. Most of the things that we learn or the emergencies that we can encounter are not going to require you to rush. There's two speeds that you can operate at, slow and screw up. And the only time I can think of that you really have to rush is when your aircraft is on fire. So look at the engine fire or the cabin fire. Look at those procedures and have them memorized. A good pilot in command will avoid quandaries. And a quandary, what is it? It's a state of perplexity or uncertainty over what to do in a difficult situation. So it's when you have to make a choice between busting minimums or running out of fuel. That's a quandary. You've already messed up if you got yourself into a situation like that. So avoid those situations. Try to back up and make the decision a little bit earlier and stay away from a situation where you'll be in a quandary like that. You utilize your passengers for traffic. Utilize all your resources. Have them look for traffic, but leave yourself an out when you're looking at an operation that maybe there's bad weather here. Make sure there's really good weather over there. If there's possible icing in this situation, make sure there's a way to get out of that icing. So leave yourself an out. If there is a situation you're getting into where there's no out, you probably shouldn't be there. Again, what I was referring to is managing your resources is have your passengers look for traffic. Utilize all the weather resources, flight service stations that we tend to ignore now that we have these iPads with all the information on it that we can get. It's just amazing. But learn how to manage these things and educate yourself and get as much information as you can about your flight. I think one of the things that I've really been complimented on is verbalizing my intentions when I fly with people, even in GA. I say, here's what I plan to do, because a lot of times we fly with other pilots and they will just hint and hope that, I don't want to correct him. I don't want to act like a jerk by telling him what to do, but he hasn't done this yet, or there's a taxiway coming up and I'm not sure if he's going to turn because we're going kind of fast. So I verbalize what I'm doing all the time, and I tell the people I'm flying with, GA or airline, that if I haven't told you what I'm about to do and you see something or have any doubt, then I'm probably about to screw up. Please feel free to question me. If I'm going to hold short of a runway, I say so. If I plan to start a descent at a certain time, I tell the other pilot I'm flying with, if he or she could remind me, hey, I'm planning to start a descent at this point. If I haven't done it yet, I've screwed up. I'm planning to hold short of this taxiway, or whatever it is. Verbalize your intentions with other pilots, and or even passengers. A really good way to have other people helping you out. Again, continue to educate yourself. You guys are here, and again, I'm preaching to the choir because you're here and you're watching this, and there are so many resources to learn more. But continually educate yourself. The other characteristic of a good pilot in command is that they're always willing to change the plan. Don't get so focused in tunnel visioned or mission hacked on an operation that you can't stop what you're doing or change the plan or say, no, we're not going to do this today. Even takeoff. Many pilots are, even though they're ready to do a go around and reject a landing, many pilots aren't ready to reject a takeoff. On flight reviews, sometimes I'll pop a door open or do something really early on that stopping the aircraft would be most prudent and very easy to do, but yet they don't because we're just mission hacked on getting that takeoff done. Takeoffs are optional too. And when you're in doubt about something, don't do it. We all have those little hairs that stand up on the back of our neck, or we get a gut feeling that something just doesn't seem right, but we don't want to seem like a chicken to the person we're flying, whether it be passengers or other pilots. So you just press on and you power through it with a little bit of hoping and praying, and that's not the way to do it. If you have little tingles in your tail or something, the hair on your neck is standing up, listen to it. Pay attention. Your inner instinct and subliminal mind knows when you're about to do something wrong, and I think you guys have probably experienced that as well.
Food out the wazoo?
Well, whatever kind of food comes out of a wazoo, I really don't think we're interested in eating.
I don't know. The guy's making a lot of sense to me. I think we should listen.
Well, yeah, I'm okay with wazoo food there.
No, you're not. The tail is tingling.
Hold on. The what is what?
When something doesn't feel right, my tail tingles. And let me tell you something. Everything you've said so far is driving my tail crazy.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when your tail tingles, the hair stands up on your neck, something just doesn't seem right. please, I implore you to listen to your inner subliminal mind who's trying to tell you something, that what you're about to do is wrong, and take a good close look at that. I also alluded to the 2 speeds, and anybody who's flown with me has known that I brief this all the time, and flying airlines or charter or being up against a schedule, I've seen many pilots rushing, or even if we're trying to get somewhere for lunch or trying to get somewhere by a certain time, and it's probably the influence of other people you've flown with, or you're trying to get things done, like doing the run-up while you're taxiing, combining things to just show how efficient and how fast you can be. I don't like it, and when I see it, I slow things down. The 2 speeds are slow and screw up. And sometimes I don't use the word screw up, I use another term, but those are the 2 speeds. We have a choice to operate at either one of those 2 speeds. And I find that when pilots rushing or even rushing to comply is a common denominator in a lot of accidents. When you're asked, hey, can you clear for takeoff without delay? Unable, just wait. If you're not ready to go, stop. You have the control over the speed of your operation, and I don't like when pilots rush. Another fact that pilot command is mentioned in the regs is when there's something wrong with the airplane. It's up to the pilot in command to discontinue a flight when something breaks, and this is in flight as well. If something goes wrong with the airplane to make it unairworthy, the regs say you're supposed to land and discontinue the flight. It's up to the pilot to determine what is the most suitable airport for that. Like, for example, if you are over an airport with a short field and the next closest is your destination, which is a really long field, and you lose your airspeed indicator, well, your airplane is no longer airworthy, but it is up to you, the pilot in command, to determine that, well, without my airspeed indicator, I might be flying faster than normal approach. I think a longer runway would be more prudent and is more suitable than the closest nearby airport. So just more thinking along the lines of diverting and coming up with suitable airports as well. I don't know why I have a picture of this, but I guess it's something about the autopilot. A pilot in command, I don't know why I've got that. I probably had a cute story. But in any event, safety belts, shoulder harnesses, again, it's up to the pilot to make sure that the passengers are using their seat belts and are briefed on it ahead of time. And many times pilots in command are a little hesitant or reluctant to give a full briefing, but they're required to do so. Operation IFR in controlled airspace, anytime you have a malfunction report, the pilot in command is responsible for, and sorry about the FARs, I should get these out of the way early so people don't fall asleep, but again, to report to ATC what you've lost and tell ATC how that's going to affect your flight so they can understand. And then if you need assistance from ATC, to ask for it and do what you have to do. Another thing is a good pilot in command. We have an example here. Everybody remembers what Sully did. And, you know, is the act of landing in the water or ditching, the skill involved with that, exactly what made him a good pilot in command in this one? No. I think what was good about what Sully did was he made a decision, and although he was even compelled or tempted or asked to try to change that, like i.e. go to Teterborough's off your right, or he stuck with the decision that he made, and that is what I believe was a good pilot in command aspect of what Sully did. He made a decision quickly, he stuck with it, and the outcome, of course, you can't argue with that. Another story of pilot in command is, if you've heard of Avianca 52, maybe you've heard of that or studied it, but here's a short story, a short video on Avianca 52, and then I'll discuss a little bit about that.
World News Sunday. Here's Forrest Sawyer.
Good evening. We begin tonight in...
And the crash of the Avianca airliner, which killed 73 people on board. It seems unbelievable that it could have run out of fuel, but it did, and today we know why it did. Investigators have added up the figures of fuel on board and time in the air, and they spell disaster. Here's Robert Hager.
New calculations by investigators make it appear it was inevitable that the Avianca plane would run out of fuel. Papers found in the wreckage today confirm that the flight plan called for about 10,000 gallons of fuel to be loaded at takeoff in Colombia. 10,000 gallons is less than half of a 707's absolute capacity, but commonly airlines don't weigh down their planes with more than what's considered prudent for safe flight. In this case, about 3/4 of the 10,000 gallons would be needed for a direct flight to New York, leaving 2,500 gallons in reserve, enough to fly 90 minutes in case of delays. Investigators now say there were 3 delays due to bad weather. One over Norfolk, Virginia for 16 minutes, another over New Jersey for 27 minutes, and a final one over New Jersey for 46 minutes. Total delays, 89 minutes, using up almost all the 90 minutes worth of reserve fuel. But investigators also understand the Avianca pilots did tell air traffic controllers their reserve fuel was low 45 to 50 minutes before the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board's Lee Dickinson.
We want to find out which controller that was given that information, how that information was passed on from controller to controller, and that's the type of information we're looking for.
And there was mourning on this Sunday in the nearby village of Oyster Bay, a memorial mass at St. Dominic's Church. Prayers for the victims and prayers of thanks for those who survived the crash. Tonight, investigators say they feel one issue in the crash is communications. Failure of the pilots to communicate the true urgency of their fuel situation, communicate that to controllers, but failure of controllers, too, to communicate with one another as the plane neared New York that this was a plane with a potential fuel problem. Garrick?
Well, Bob, if the controllers knew there was indeed a fuel problem, why didn't they bring that plane in earlier for a landing?
Well, Garrick, in bad weather, controllers get used to hearing a lot of complaints from pilots. The controllers are very busy to start with. Some pilots are not above a trick or two to express a mild concern about fuel in order to get out of a holding pattern and jump the line. So I think the feeling is if you want to get the controllers' attention well, you've got to do something like declare an emergency. That would do it.
Thanks, Bob Hager.
And the most poignant advice there is that to declare an emergency when you have an emergency. It cracks me up when he says, why didn't the controller bring them in early? As if the controller is flying the airplane. That's not the case. The pilot is in command of the airplane. I ask, have you ever heard of a controller in command? No, it's the pilot in command, and the controller can't know what you've got going on. It's up to the pilot to relay that. And so in this case, I like to ask, was that a good pilot in command? No, he ate up all his reserve fuel, did not declare an emergency, did not relay the seriousness of his situation to air traffic control. At that point, when you start getting delays, you have to declare an emergency and say, no, I'm landing now. I need to go in right now. I'm out of fuel. You need to do what you have to do as a pilot in command. And I recently had this happen going into New York last month. I got a holding pattern. We didn't have the fuel to hold as long as we were cleared to hold. We were starting a diversion into Philadelphia. During that diversion, the air traffic controller came on and said, we can get you into Kennedy if you'd like. And so I said, yeah, that's where all my passengers want to go. Let's go. We get cleared direct to Kennedy. We're flying that way. And they said, all right, no, we're not going to get you. We're closing off again. We're going to have to divert. And I said, I don't have fuel to hold anymore, so I have to divert. And we're headed toward Newark. And he says, all right, yeah, I'm sorry, we can get you into Kennedy. So changing plans again. And an interesting story that I didn't realize until I started flying the Airbus is that when I changed the destination in my FMS in the cockpit, that all of the people with the seat back video monitors that show our destination, they can see right away that, okay, now we're going to Philadelphia. Okay, now we're going to New York. And when I change it to Newark, they see we're going to Newark. And so I start getting knocks on the door from the flight attendant. Hey, are we going to Newark? And I thought, what the heck how do they know that? Well, turns out my FMS is linked to those monitors in the back. So need to communicate with your passengers as to what's going on. And in this situation, they knew it as soon as we loaded it. So we started toward New York, and they tried to give us yet another delay and another divert. And I said, unable, declaring an emergency, proceeding direct to the runway. That's exactly what I did. They said, okay, you're clear to land. And I had no repercussions from that. I got what I needed out of it. I was not delayed any further. There are no reports to write, and if there are, you can justify it. If you're in a situation that requires an immediate assistance, you're to declare an emergency. The problem is that many pilots are reluctant to do so, and they don't declare that emergency until they are in an urgent situation. Like if you're about to run out of fuel, that's an emergency. Some pilots wait till the engine fails and then declare an emergency at that point, and that's too late. It's time to declare an emergency when you know that that potential exists. And it actually says that in the AIM, that is the time to ask for help, not after the situation has developed into a distress condition. And so that is what pilots need to do, is request assistance immediately when you need it. So do not hesitate to declare an emergency. If this were a live webinar and with people right here with me instead of sitting in my office in a very quiet room and a monitor and a camera, I would ask, hey, who's declared an emergency? Why haven't you? Did you ever have a flight where you should have declared an emergency yet you didn't? And why didn't you? And what happened? And what would you differently now? Ask yourself these questions. It's a good exercise to think about. And so a good pilot will manage this risk before it even gets to that. Risk is a problem. It's a big buzzword now. And so I like to ask people, what is more dangerous? Driving a car, flying an airplane, riding a bike? And there's no clear answer. The answer is, it depends. Because if you're riding a bike here, obviously that's going to be a little bit more risky. And here's a little bit of a comment from Bob Hoover on risk.
And there's something about risk-taking that you don't think anything's going to ever happen to you. It just only happens to other people. You like to think that I'm smarter than the airplane is, and I'll know how to handle whatever situation comes my way. That isn't always the case. If you have a malfunction at the wrong place at the wrong time, you're dead.
And that's true. There are sometimes when you just have a situation, like if you have an engine failure taking off out of a mountainous airport and it happens at exactly the wrong time, you just may be out of luck. There may be times when you just don't want to put yourself in that situation, but everything we do involves some kind of risk. Just getting out of bed involves risk. And if I'm going to bed and I see I put my shoes between the walkway, between the bed and the bathroom, well, I can see a hazard there. And the risk is I'm going to trip over those things. I can mitigate that by moving my shoes before I go to bed, knowing full well that I'm going to be walking to the bathroom in the middle of the night when it's dark. And that's kind of what we're talking about with mitigating risk. And we do accept a certain amount of risk if it's worth it. And one of the exercises I like to talk about to try to say, okay, what's risk versus reward with risk? Well, in managing and mitigating risk, if I were to lay this 2x12 plank across the floor and offer you $20 to walk across it, would you do it? Normally, I'd probably see a show of hands of everybody in the room. Yeah, I'd do that. How about if I set that plank up between two chairs? It's 12 foot long. It's between two chairs. It's about 2 feet off the ground. If I offer you $20, would you walk across that? Maybe half the people would do that. Well, now let's take an extreme example. Put that board up across between the two high-rise buildings. You're 20 stories in the air. Would you walk across that plank for $20? And maybe one person, if any, will say, yeah, I'll do that. But so the risk is not worth the reward. Falling off a 20-story building off the plank that high is not worth $20. But now what if I told you that the building you're standing on is on fire and the other one is not? Well, now living becomes the reward, and maybe that risk is worth it. So you need to weigh out, if I'm taking a risk, what's the reward? Is it worth it? Is it worth taking this risk? And so on and so forth. Risk management, simply put, it's basically a continual series of making good judgments, making decisions. Well, we're flying airplanes. We're doing that all the time. And there's trust versus complacency is another issue, that most pilots don't perceive reality. They suffer from a normative philosophy where they anticipate what ought to be and not what really is. We see what we expect to see, we see what should be, and we get this blissful ignorance because I've had years of uneventful flying that I get a false sense of security. And I feel, and you feel invincible because this is not going to happen to me. This happens to other people. I'd encourage you to be aggressively safe. It's a term that we've seen at the airlines that I've used a lot. Be aggressive about safety. You trust that a wing will remain attached, that a fuel tank will not spring a leak. Don't allow that trust to erode into some kind of complacency where you just trust that that's going to happen all the time. Check your fuel. Check your wing, check the nuts and bolts all over your airplane, all the connections to your flight controls and so on. Just don't be trusting that everything will keep working. We don't get into the airplane like many people get into a car where you just trust that everything's going to work and you keep going. And if you see a tire that's wearing out, don't trust that it's going to make it through one more landing because it's made it through the last 100. If you see a tire wearing out, replace it. Or don't trust that the oil quantity was good on the last flight. It should be fine on this flight. It only takes one flight for that engine to start burning oil or have a problem. So just be cautious of blissful ignorance and feeling invincible. If you start feeling that way about yourself, then, or about your operation, you're setting yourself up a trap. So just try to be aware of these things and what can happen when you start just feeling like everything's going just fine. Pilot and command and the ATC relationship is a very important one. There is a document, the Pilot Controller Glossary, with which you should be familiar. It's a misnomer that air traffic control controls the airplanes. The pilots control the airplanes, like we saw in that news video of Avianca 52. And they said, why didn't that controller bring it in for a landing earlier? Well, the controller's not flying the airplane. Bear in mind that the responsibilities of, if you're IFR, that TRACON, center, and the approach control, their responsibilities are to separate IFR traffic from one another. They don't have to separate IFR from VFR. If you're an IFR and you're in visual conditions, you need to watch out for VFR traffic. That's why they have cloud clearance requirements. ATC will separate or provide traffic information, but just don't rely on it. What they tell you is there, but also the ones they don't tell you about might be there as well. So let's see. Going on here. I just talked about all that. Never heard of controller in command, and so on and so forth. And the one word that I like in the Pilot Controller Glossary is the word unable. It is a word that you should never be hesitant to use if you need. It's a great tool to keep in your hip pocket. Like if ATC says maintain your present heading, and that's what you see right in front of you, that is one example of when you might want to use the word unable. If it's just something you're not comfortable with, don't let a controller talk you into doing it. They're doing what they need to do, but if you can't do it, tell them. Let's see, this is more for a live seminar. The go, no-go decision is very important. And in my 34 years of flying airplanes, I have more stories about being stuck or grabbing a dinner and a beer somewhere where I didn't plan on being than I do about harrowing experiences of getting myself into a bad situation. So really weigh it out and don't let your ego or finances or anything like that get in the way. Try to remove your inner passenger from the pilot in command when you are going through making these decision-making processes. Go stay inside the envelope, follow the rules, and have your own personal minimums. And lastly, operate at one of two speeds, slow or screw up. You choose that speed. That's all I've got for now. I'm happy to take some questions. I could go on and on forever. I'll have my email address and my website up there on the screen after this. In fact, I'll put it up now. But I'm happy to take questions or talk about anything else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it. It's really interesting to listen to a lot of that stuff. It's stuff that sparks memories in me from even my initial training, the whole idea of getting somewhere. My private pilot instructor going back to 2003 would always say, get there-itis. He always said to me, Brian, you can't have get there-itis. I always had that, and I especially gained that when it was getting close to solo time. And my very first solo was very important to me. I remember the day it finally happened, but 2 times that I tried to do it, the weather was so, but I just so desperately wanted to solo. And so he utilized that. Right?
Get there-itis is a common disease. Yeah.
Get there. And I just thought he was being like I felt like it was a controlling parent telling me I couldn't go out tonight or something like that. But it's so true. It was so good that we held off until the conditions were right. Because I remember when I first took off solo, I looked to my left and no one was there. And I think I screamed a little bit. And I was like, oh crap. I'm glad I didn't do this 2 days ago when the going was a little bit tougher.
I hear you. And anybody out there who's got an iPhone, you owe me one for not killing Steve Jobs that day.
I actually just got a new one the other day, so thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
If anyone has any questions for those of you who are participating, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. Otherwise, you can do your raise hand and we can take your questions live. We'll unmute your microphone. Don't worry, you won't come on camera. It'll just be your voice, and you can ask a question here with Brian live in real time. One thing that you were talking about, Brian, I wanted to go back to. You talked about declaring an emergency, and I wrote down, and you talked about it as well. As I'm writing it down, you started to address it. How often pilots tend to be a bit gun shy, if you will, on actually making that declaration early as opposed to waiting until it's too late, so to speak. So would you have any pointers on building confidence in making that judgment call earlier rather than later?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Many pilots are hesitant to declare an emergency because they're afraid of the outcome of what they might have to do, that they might get in trouble for having screwed something up, that there may be reports to write, that they have to answer the FAA, that they're admitting failure of some kind. That's not what it is. My instructor, if he's still watching here, taught me that when you need something that you're not getting from air traffic control, that's the time to declare an emergency. I declared an emergency just flying an RNAV arrival one time, and they switched runways and we had to change the approach around, and I just didn't have time to do it before I was approaching a fix that would turn one way or the other, and the controller wasn't listening to what I was saying when I said unable, and I just said, I'm declaring an emergency, I need a heading. If you're not getting what you need, you declare an emergency. There are no repercussions, except the biggest repercussion is you get to live and the flight is much safer. I encourage you that to have the ego to do it. As a pilot in command, you are in charge of that airplane. And if you are not willfully breaking or violating an FAR just to do something like buzz your neighbors, declaring an emergency allows you to do so, allows you to get away with what you need to do to make the flight safer. So I really want to encourage you to think about it. Anytime you need something or things aren't going right, declare that emergency. It opens up a lot of doors for ATC to help you if you're talking to ATC. And it will get a lot of help coming your way that wasn't otherwise going to come your way. And also ATC will realize the seriousness of your situation and focus on you and give you more attention. I just want to say the best advice I can give is that I've declared, I don't know, several emergencies, maybe a handful, maybe 8 or so. I've never had to answer to what I did. I've never had to write a report or get investigated or anything like that. But what did happen is I got exactly what I needed.
Oh yeah, the clear communication as shown through the video on Avianca, the Avianca crash. I remember I grew up on Long Island, so I actually remember that incident. My parents remember it very well. Yeah, clear communication about what you want will usually get you exactly what you need.
Yes.
And ambiguity has really no place in aviation.
Yes, and don't be afraid to. It's not admitting failure. A lot of pilots think that if they declare an emergency, they're admitting failure. You're not. You're just saying, hey, I'm in a situation that could become perilous. We need to do what we got to do here.
Now, for someone like me, I said, admittedly, I have not been in the general aviation world in quite some time. What would be your recommendation for someone like myself to get back into it, who might be reluctant or worried about going back to what was the roots of my training, what was the root of my passion in aviation? How do I get back into it, and how do I build my confidence in flying a smaller aircraft again?
Well, the obvious is go find a flight instructor that you like and go for a fun flight. Say, look, let's just go somewhere for a hamburger. Let's go fly here for lunch or whatever, but do it with an instructor and say, I'd like to work toward a flight review and work. I say get a flight review and with an instructor you like on a mission that will be fun. I think that's the best thing to do. Go for a hamburger with a flight instructor and say, I'd like to reset my flight review clock. It doesn't have to be 24 calendar months. You could be 1 year out, but you've just not flown for a whole year because of COVID. So go get an instructor and say, hey, I would love to have a flight review. Let's just work on that right now. But let's do it let's go get a hamburger and make it fun.
I do like hamburgers and I like fun. So yeah. all that adds up pretty well.
And it doesn't have to be a hamburger.
That's true. Yeah. We have a question from Andrew here. And before I jump into it, again, anyone who has a question, feel free to drop it in the question and answer box, or you can use the raise hand function down there and we can unmute your microphone. You can ask your question live. Brian, Andrew asks, thanks a ton for the info, Brian. I'm a new private pilot about to start a cadet program. And I'm wondering about the differences in practices as pilot in command in general aviation as opposed to commercial aviation. What can you share in whether the major differences from GA to in a commercial aviation setting?
That's a great question. And I think that in the commercial aviation setting, I think we feel more empowered. We're less reluctant to declare an emergency if we have to. And we feel like we really, truly are in command as a brand new pilot. And it's new pilots, even that I fly with, whether it be GA or airlines, feel as though air traffic control, the tower, Everybody else is God. I mean, they are just the word that they say has to be complied with. To answer your question, there is no difference, but it's easier for a commercial pilot to exert his authority. I'd like to encourage you as a GA pilot or a new pilot to put yourself, remember, you're pilot in command. I'd like you to see new pilots bump that ego up a little bit and just act like you're a commercial pilot. Hey, pretend I'm flying an airliner or I'm flying a corporate jet here, and just get that ego up to the point where you're willing to stand up to air traffic control or stand up to other people or do what you know is right. As a pilot, you have a feeling and you know that something just doesn't seem right. Or even if it's a student pilot and an instructor is asking you to do something you're not comfortable with, speak up. A lot of times instructors are looking, really the act of an instructor teaching someone to fly is transitioning the successful outcome of the flight from the right seat to the left seat. And so that instructor is watching to see that you can take control of that situation, that you're going to say no to doing something stupid, that you're going to be in command of that airplane. And even DPEs are looking for the successful outcome of the flight never being in doubt. So as a new pilot, take command, take control, don't do what you don't like to do.
No, good advice. And I mean, so much, we put so much weight, I know from my flight training, on making sure we know our maneuvers, and we are experts at the different flight maneuvers and takeoffs and landings. But so much of what you're judged on all throughout your aviation journey, whether that be in general aviation, whether that be going on to commercial aviation, is decision-making skill. And it's hard to teach that. Well, it's not hard to teach it. It is hard to, I guess, instill the importance of it and to really fine-tune decision-making skills. I might be wrong in saying that, and you can probably correct me there. You can definitely coach someone on how to best improve their decision-making, but it's such an important aspect that I think a lot of that I forgot even in my own training, that making sure my chandelles were perfect is more important than being able to make a go-around decision.
Right, and that's what I was saying at the beginning, where we're taught all these things, but we're not taught about the judgment and the decision-making. And as instructors, if you're watching, it's incumbent upon an instructor to not go along with the do as I say, not as I do theory, to do in front of the instructor, in front of the student. The students are very impressionable. If you do something, the instructors are going to mimic, the students are going to mimic their instructors. So instructors, if you're out there, please act like you want your students to act. Behave like you want your students to behave, because they will mimic you. If you say do as I say, not as I do, they're still going to do what you do.
We have a question from Lourdes here. Lourdes says, what would you recommend to a pilot in command on how they can best improve their communication in a CRM environment when they're operating in a aircraft that has another certified pilot as well, that they need to work together to get the job done?
I presume we're talking about communication with the other pilot or with ATC, or do we know?
CRM internally within the cockpit.
Internally, briefings are great. Talk about what you're going to do. When two pilots fly together, one of the biggest risks, and this is something they're teaching at the airlines, and you've probably seen it as well at JetBlue, is the trapping errors. Error, threat, and error management. And so we want to trap the errors. We want to verbalize what we're doing with briefings, and don't hint and hope if you're the other pilot. So if someone else is flying and they're cruising along at an altitude that's wrong way for direction, and you think they might know it, might not know it, don't hint and hope. Don't just sit there and wait and think see if they're going to figure it out. What you want to do is just be vocalizing your thoughts and being okay with that. Any pilot with whom you fly who's not okay with you verbalizing or discussing or not open to listen is not somebody you want to be flying with anyway. So to improve those communication skills with other pilots, verbalize everything. Say what you're comfortable with. Don't be afraid to admit what you're not comfortable with or what you're not willing to do, and get the other pilot talking. That's the best way, is just to keep talking to each other.
Thank you. Two-part question here. What would you say, what is your top piece of advice, Brian, for number one, a brand new private pilot who just got their private pilot's license and they're about ready to get in the aircraft alone, maybe take family members up? What is your best piece of advice for them as they go to operate as pilot in command. And then number two, someone who has a lot of time and is really resting on the laurels of all their past experience as an aviator, and they're getting comfortable, the time where sometimes you get a little dangerous. So what's your recommendation for someone just starting out as being PIC and someone who's been PIC for 5, 10 plus years for how to best be on their game?
Well, these are great questions. The brand new pilot, stick to what you've just learned. Don't compromise because you got your private pilot now. You're gonna not do your checklist, or I'm not gonna adhere to the things that I just did on my check ride. Follow all the procedures, and the important thing is, like I said before, if you know the rules and regulations, stay inside of those. Make smaller, tighter personal minimums. Because you can fly with 1,000 overcast and 3 miles doesn't mean that you should. So have your own personal minimums. Operate slowly. Stay within the envelope. And if you are brand new at something, again, develop these personal minimums. Have everything go in your favor, but slow down, follow the rules, follow the regulations, follow your own personal minimums. I recommend having these personal minimums written down, signed, and shown to a flight instructor so that you can be accountable to them. It's when pilots go outside that and say, oh, yeah, it's 2.5 miles, but I can do special VFR now. I'm a private pilot, and so on and so forth. It's when you start getting outside those lines that things start getting dangerous. But obviously operate slowly and be in command of the airplane. As far as the very experienced pilot, this is where you get into bad habits. This is why flight reviews are good. As a very experienced pilot, I encourage you to go up with a professional pilot, another professional pilot, let them see what you're doing, get a flight review to weed out those bad habits that you've built up. But go back to the basics again and slow down. Pilots with a lot of experience, that experience can make up for, when bad things happen or they push the limits a little bit, then their experience kicks in. Or if they're flying while fatigued, sometimes a more experienced pilot can get away with that because he's got the muscle memory and the experience to make up for that. But don't push the edges again when you're a very experienced pilot. Recognize that, hey, I am prone to becoming complacent, and admit to yourself that I do not want to be complacent. I'm going to be thorough as I can be. And again, one of two speeds: go slow and stay within the envelope.
No, all good advice, whether you are brand new starting out or you are in it for the long haul. Well, Brian, we've been together for a little over an hour now, so I'm going to wrap it up with one final question for you. Tell me the truth. That taxiway light behind you, did you take that from an airport, or did you actually? Where can we get one of those without stealing one?
Oh my gosh, that's funny you asked that. No, I didn't hit that. I didn't knock it over. I didn't steal it from an airport. I actually thought it was really cool. I saw it on eBay and I bought it. And I still need to color the base to match the rest of it, as you can see. I just thought my favorite color is blue, and I saw that and I thought I need a little decorative light, and I just bought it for that shelf behind me. No story. I'm sorry, there's no fun story there to go with it.
Now, if you're ever asked that again, you should make up something even more interesting. Extend the truth a little bit. Sometimes that can make for a good story.
I do need to work on a better story for that. It was 2 a.m. and the airport gate was open.
And no one needs to know any more than that.
Right.
No, but that's definitely Christmas is coming, so I'm going to add that to my Christmas wish list. Well, Brian, thank you so very much for spending time with us today. Definitely appreciate your expertise, appreciate the time and energy you put into all of the seminars that you put on to really broaden safety within aviation. Really, what you're doing is increasing safety across aviators with your experience, with the experience of others, and with the information you're able to pass on to aspiring aviators and also people who've been in it for a long time who are getting, as you said, comfortable. So definitely thank you for your time and supporting NGPA and for the work you do with NAFI as well.
Glad to do it. I think you guys got a great program, and I'm glad to see you doing it. So thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Of course. And to all of our attendees, thanks so much for being here. To those of you joining us who couldn't be here live, but you're seeing our recording, definitely check out more about NGPA at www.ngpa.org. And of course, for those of you joining us on our podcast, taking us on the go, hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. And for those of you who are interested in our podcast, you can search NGPA Podcast. That's available on Spotify, iHeartRadio, as well as Pandora Podcasts. Don't forget, today is the last day to submit your applications for NGPA scholarships. Over $156,000 available for all different areas of training in aviation, as well as some higher education pieces, A&P mechanic pieces as well, and even a dispatcher scholarship I forgot to mention earlier. On behalf of the entire board of directors of the NGPA, or over 3,000 active members, we truly appreciate you joining us here at Up in the Air. More content's coming your way at www.ngpa.com/up in the air. Until next time, to continue to take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Brian, Schiff, thank you so much for being here. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. And we'll see you next time at NGPA's Up in the Air webinar. So long, everybody. Have a great afternoon.